Hi everybody, welcome to A Course in Miracles Applied. Today's topic could be called Love Does Not Oppose. The quote is actually, you can find the quote in chapter 22, section 5, Weakness and Defensiveness, the first paragraph, sentence 6, it says reality opposes nothing. And because reality equals love, equals oneness, equals heaven, God, eternity and such, it is the same. There is a really great workshop by Gloria Wapnick and Ken Wapnick called Love Does Not Oppose. It's, I think, from the early 90s. It's a good-sized workshop on tape or CD or downloadable from the facim.org. It's very good. So I'm gonna just read or take that first paragraph in chapter 22, section 5 in the text as a starting point, a jump-off point, and then go from there. And the question we ask in this segment is also the first sentence in this chapter, in this section, which is, the question is, how does one overcome illusions, right? There's always the question of how do we do it? And this segment and this kind of section in the text gives us just, again, an ever so slightly different viewpoint, with the goal that we kind of take whatever works for us and apply that to our daily work with the Course. We're going to start in the level up here. And we can't really talk about that without talking about the second paragraph in the introduction to the text, which states, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. That is the foundation of our work with the Course. And if we can get out of our body for a second, out of this world, out of our mindset that is very limited, and imagine a state that we can't really imagine, right? This is just an exercise. Imagine a state that is where there's no division, there's no, it has no parts, it has no separated parts, it's just one. And it is love and eternity, all truth, all meaning the same thing. It is something we cannot comprehend with the mind that we are connected to right now. But this reality, this is the only reality. We have completely blotted it out at this very moment. We cannot conceive of what the Course calls a oneness joined as one, because in our experience, in our day-to-day operation, there's always at least two, and there's one that observes and the other one is the observed. There's always a relationship between one thing and another thing, and we cannot even begin to comprehend what it is, what it would mean to just have one. Right? So that's not what Jesus talks about a lot. He doesn't spend a lot of time on it. He just uses it as the very foundation for our learning. And one way of him talking about it is that line when it says reality opposes nothing, because there's literally nothing to oppose. The moment reality would oppose something, it wouldn't be reality anymore, right? Reality is reality because there is nothing else. Everything else is illusion, and reality does not oppose illusions, because otherwise the illusion would be real, right? So what we have made real in our dream, in this illusory state that we believe in 100%, right, as we experience ourselves right now, what we have made real is that wrong mind of the ego that is based on the tiny mad idea being not just a tiny mad idea of separation, but it actually occurred, and sin, that was what the ego told us was a sin, and a tremendous experience of guilt followed that had to be projected outward through the attack on God. And then we were afraid of God, and we split into billions of pieces and made our home, quote unquote, our home away from home in this world, with this body, with this personality, and with many, many opposing ideas, right? This world is nothing but an opposing idea. The idea of the ego is to create or make a world that opposes God. The Course says this world was made as an attack on God. It was made as an opposition to God. And it is the opposite of oneness, right? It is based on separation. It is based on one or the other. It's based on kill or be killed, means if one thing exists, it has to consume something else. It does not. Nothing in this world can live on its own. Right? We always have to consume something in order to survive. So that is the idea of the ego, of making a world that opposes God. The non-dualistic thought system of the Course states that reality opposes nothing, right? There is no opposition to reality. A dualistic thought system, for example, would be Christianity, and the Bible would be an example of a dualistic thought system where there is opposition, right? God opposes the devil opposes God. There's men, there's flesh, there's spirit, there's flesh, there's good, there's evil, and we must oppose evil at all times. And there's no way we can escape this notion within ourselves, because we came here being 100% identified with the ego thought system, the ego thought system of opposition, right? And we cannot but try to learn this Course within this framework of our thought process. In other words, we can't study and practice this Course purely as the Course intended it. Namely, reality opposes nothing. We are in the mindset, which is very normal, right? We're in the mindset of, in order for us to get back to the right mind, we somehow must oppose, in one way, shape, or form, the ego thought system. We must get over it. We must get out of it. We must overcome it. We must change something within ourselves in order to get back home. And Jesus asks us he asks a general question in this first paragraph of section 5, Weakness and Defensiveness. He says, how does one overcome illusions, right? If the only goal of the Course is for us to get back home, to return our awareness to the presence of love within us. How do we overcome the illusion of this thought system of the sin, guilt, the attack on God, fear, identification with the world, identification is salvation, right? How do we overcome this illusory thought system within ourselves? Many statements have been made, and the Course has many statements. In one way, kind of true statements. The question that we can ask ourselves always is how? How do we do it? Right? How do we see the Christ in our brother, for example, right? How do we get back home? How do we make a decision, a final decision for the Holy Spirit? And part of this paragraph gives us at least part of an answer, and we can kind of comprehend the rest when we pull other things out of the Course and put it all together in a way that makes sense. So he says, how does one overcome illusions? How does one overcome the ego, right? And he says, and surely not by force or anger, nor by opposing them in any way. So we cannot overcome illusions by force, by forcing them out. We cannot overcome illusions by opposing them. Now, what does that mean? What could we say is a synonym for opposing? If we talk about the ego thought system as the illusion, right? How can we overcome our resistance against love, right? How can we overcome us feeling guilty? How can we overcome us judging everybody? How can we overcome us feeling judged or feeling abandoned or feeling betrayed or feeling annoyed or anxious or jealous or any kind of emotions of the ego, right? How can we overcome this? And Jesus says, not by opposing them in any way. So what does that mean for us when he says we overcome this ego thought system that we're so connected to, that we're joined to? We overcome it not by opposing it in any way, right? Not by trying to change it in any way. Not by trying to starve it out, to cut it out, or to run in the opposite direction. So opposing the ego does not get us out. It's interesting because Jesus, the whole Course is basically tells us you have a choice, right? This is like the main theme, like a golden thread throughout all the pages. My brother, choose again, right? But if we're totally honest, and I talked about this in previous segments, we don't know really what that means. What does it mean to choose again? What does it mean to choose the Holy Spirit? Because for the most part, in our current state, we're not able to choose for an experience that we are completely forgiven, for example, or that the other person is completely forgiven, and let this experience last, right? We have glimpses of it. But by and large, we are faced with a different kind of truth that in practical application, we are mostly unable to decide against the ego and for the Holy Spirit, if we're really honest with ourselves. If that is part of, because we're so invested in the ego thought system, right? And we don't even know how deep our investment is. And Jesus says, don't oppose that. Don't try to decide for me, he would say. Don't try to decide for me. Even though I'm telling you, you have a choice, right? Don't try to decide for me. We doing this course, us trying our best in our day-to-day practice, that is our choice for him, right? We have already made a substantial choice to follow his teachings. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. We would not have picked up the course. We wouldn't read in it. We wouldn't study it. We wouldn't try to apply it. So we have already made a decision for Jesus in one way, shape, or form, right? We're still ambivalent. We still don't trust him. That's why we go back and forth between the two thought systems so many times. But what he tells us is basically, listen, if you feel anything that isn't complete forgiveness for everybody and complete peace, you have decided for the ego thought system, right? And we all know this prayer, chapter 5, section 7, the decision for God, when it says, I must have decided wrongly. Or it says, previous sentence, it says, say this to yourself as sincerely as you can when you feel you're not in peace. It says, I must have decided wrongly because I'm not at peace. I made the decision myself, but I can also decide otherwise. I want to decide otherwise because I want to be at peace. I do not feel guilty because the Holy Spirit will undo all the consequences of my wrong decision if I will let him. I choose to let him by allowing him to decide for God for me. Very nice prayer, right? It rarely works. When Jesus says, I want to decide otherwise because I want to be at peace, he gives us a way out of the ego thought system, but this isn't something we can do at this very moment. This prayer is there to hold up across our whole journey home, right? Let's just say that journey is 50 years. There's no number to it, but it's a substantial amount of time usually, right? And this prayer accompanies us on our journey, right? And the first line, I must have decided wrongly because I'm not at peace, that is the first step, because we realize even though we can't make a decision for the Holy Spirit, because we're too afraid of that part yet, right? We can't really make a decision for the Holy Spirit right now. At least I can acknowledge to myself that being or feeling whatever I'm feeling here is a decision. That is a huge step, right? So, but the decision for the Holy Spirit on a continuous basis is not something we can make right now, very simply because if it was so simple, we would make it. Why aren't we at peace 100% of the time? Because we are unable to make that decision for Jesus right now. Right? So Jesus tells us, I'm going to tell you in this course, you have a choice, but even though you have this choice, doesn't mean you are able to choose. I'm just giving you the understanding as a correction for the ego, because the ego says you have no choice. The outside world decides on how you will feel and what you will think. Your neighbor, your loud neighbor will decide how you feel. The stock market will decide how you feel. This sickness, this illness that you have will decide how you feel. Your partner will decide how you feel. Right? And Jesus' correction for that is no. You decide how you feel. That doesn't mean we can make this choice, because if we could make this choice, we would make this choice. Right now, we have a theoretical knowledge of how this works. We are in the ego thought system, and Jesus says, you can decide for me. Right? You made the decision for the ego yourself, but you can also decide otherwise. You can decide otherwise. And part of you wants to decide otherwise because part of you wants to be at peace. But there's another big part that does not want to be at peace, that does not want to decide for Jesus, because that part, which is us, is too afraid to make that choice right at this very moment. Right? We are too afraid to make the choice for Jesus. Otherwise, we would make it. Because everything the Course says is true. We can decide to see the Christ in our brother right now. But we're only theoretical. This is only in theory right now, because we are still too invested in the ego thought system in order for us to make a meaningful choice for the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, we would make the choice right now. What stops us from 24 hours a day, 60 minutes, 60 seconds per minute, making that choice for Jesus? Why aren't we at peace 100% of the time? If Jesus says you have a choice, why don't you make this choice, right? So this choice that Jesus talks about is there, and it takes a lot of learning for us to even accept the idea that we have a choice. Jesus does not expect us to make this choice right now. That's for later. That is actually not even for later. We don't have to make that choice. We have to make the choice to look at whatever stops us from making the choice. The rest comes by itself. So, what does this have to do with our topic? Love does not oppose. Jesus is a symbol for love, right? Jesus is the symbol for forgiveness, and Jesus is the symbol for vision. The vision of Christ, the Holy Spirit, has the same symbolic meaning than Jesus, and forgiveness and vision. So if we say love does not oppose, we can translate that and say the Holy Spirit does not oppose, Jesus does not oppose, forgiveness does not oppose. Which means, really, Jesus does not go against our decision for the ego. Jesus does not go against our decision against him. Right? Love does not oppose our decision against love. So our decision against Jesus, which is constant, right? We decide for the ego constantly, continuously, because we're so afraid of going back to this love, because we believe we have attacked God, and he's now waiting for us the moment we switch over to this side continuously and for good. God will get us. That's why we go over there and we go right back, right? And we all have that experience. We've vacillate thousands of times back and forth throughout the day. So Jesus does not oppose, first of all, he doesn't oppose the ego thought system at all. Right? All the drama that's going on, the wars, the conflict, the murder, the destruction, the war within our mind, our own guilt, our own belief in sin, our own attack and fear and all that cycle. Jesus does not oppose that. He does not oppose our decision for the ego. He does not say, no, decide for me. He says that, but not for us to do it. He says it so that we know we have a choice. It takes a very long time for us to let it sink in that we have a choice, and we can't dismiss that because we have pounded it into ourselves that we do not have a choice. Not having a choice means we are safe from God. We believe we're so sinful, right, that if we were to make a choice for God, he would kill us. So we eradicated the option of choice from our conscious awareness, completely blotted it out, and substituted it with, I have no choice but to react to the world, right? I can make a choice of using this pencil and that pen, but I can't decide that I feel abandoned, right? And Jesus says, no, you have a choice. That's the correction for the ego thought system. Again, we said that doesn't mean we can make the choice because we are too afraid of God, right? We don't want to make that choice. And Jesus does not oppose that decision. And if Jesus doesn't oppose that decision, where does this leave us, right? When Jesus asks, how does one overcome illusions? How do we overcome this whole ego thought system? In our daily lives, when we get up in the morning, we have hundreds of thoughts about people, about instances, the future, the past. We struggle with something. We go throughout our day. We believe we're this person, right? We attack, we judge, we condemn, we try to make up for it. We go through our whole day, right? And we tend to, because that's the most normal thing to do, is to try to oppose it. And the ego rejoices. The ego rejoices in us opposing the ego. The ego says, yes, try to change me. Try not to do this thing. Try not to think in terms of the ego. Try to think with Jesus, right? That's what the ego says, and we believe it. But opposing something makes it real. Opposing the ego thought system, trying to change it, trying to get out of it, trying to get away from it, trying to overcome it, try to escape it, makes it real. Just as trying to escape a situation in our lives, trying to escape certain decisions that we're making, certain patterns, right? We have certain patterns. Maybe we attract certain people over and over and over again. Maybe we just can't make enough money to pay our bills, right? And we're trying to oppose that. We're trying to get out of it. And we believe the Course tells us that that's what we're supposed to do. But then Jesus says, reality opposes nothing. So where does this leave us with our application of the Course principles? How do we go through our day looking at our ego all the time when Jesus tells us truth, love opposes nothing? It's a tricky thing, right? And I think it's good to pat ourselves on the back a lot, right? To acknowledge our work with this Course, to acknowledge our progress, however small it is, however limited our understanding is. There's so much more waiting for us. And to acknowledge the notion that we probably have to do much less than we think we need to do. If we don't have to oppose the ego thought system, what do we then have to do? Right? If we don't have to change it, if we don't even have to change our decision for the ego, Jesus only tells us he wants us to become aware of the ego thought system in all of its thousands of expressions, right? The expression of the idea of sin in this world, in our lives, has thousands and thousands of little pieces and particles. We can see it everywhere. But Jesus does not want us to, well, I don't think he wants us to change it. He wants us to become aware of that. That's what we're doing, right? Not opposing it, but looking at it. Becoming aware of our ego thought system, becoming aware when we are, not thinking of him, not thinking of the Holy Spirit for days on end, for weeks on end, for hours or minutes on end. When we forget him, when we forget God, when we feel active resistance, when we feel active resistance to talking to other people, right? To meeting people. Or when we want to meet a lot of people. Right? He only asks us to look at the ego thought system without opposition. If we judge the person in the grocery aisle in front of us, right, because they're so slow or whatever they're doing, we're having a rough day and they're just not doing it the right way we want it, right? The ego comes in immediately and says, you should try to change this because now that you're a Course student, you should be a little bit more enlightened and you should really no longer judge the other person. Which means the ego says, please oppose me. Try to get away from me, the ego says. Try to change me. Pay attention to me. And Jesus would say, just look at it. Look at what you're doing. Look at what you're thinking. Take me by the hand. And together we can look at it without opposition. Nothing needs to be changed because this up here cannot change. Nothing real can be threatened. Love cannot change. You are always the Son of God, at home in the oneness of heaven. Nothing happened. Everything else is your nightmare that is based on your belief in sin, incredible experience of guilt, attack, defense, attack, cycle throughout days and weeks and months and years and decades of war, either other countries against ourselves, our body, our neighbors. It's all based on illusory belief that we have successfully separated from God. And when we try to change this, we say, you know what, the separation has occurred, and if I'm practicing well enough, if I can pull it off to overcome the ego, then I will be back home. And I hope you can slowly start to see how big that trap is. Jesus says, don't do anything, nothing, don't do anything. If you find yourself judging the person in front of you, just ask me for help to look at it. Okay, Jesus, I'm judging this other person because ultimately I want to get rid of my guilt, and that guilt makes me so afraid of your love. That's why I'm pushing this other person away. It's the end of the story. No opposition. Don't try to change the judgment. Less judgment. The ego says you should be able to judge less. You should be able to see the Christ in your brother more often than what you actually do right now. And if we can go back to this line, reality opposes nothing. Nothing in us needs to be opposed. Jesus does not see anything within us that needs opposition. It is the opposite of everything we've learned so far. And we can't handle it. And the Course says it is an insult to the ego, right? It says, for example, it is very hard for you to realize it is not personally insulting that your contribution and the Holy Spirit's are so extremely disproportionate. The Holy Spirit is the one that is looking with the vision of Christ on everybody. We don't have to do it. We can't do it. We're too afraid to do it. Jesus tells us we have the vision of Christ in our right mind, and eventually we will get there, right? But right now we're too afraid, and we look at that. We said, I cannot see my brother in the light of Christ. That is all we need to do. And the ego is insulted by our laziness. We're just sitting on the beach in a lawn chair having a frozen margarita with Jesus next to us looking at our judgments. And the ego goes nuts because the ego says, no, you got to change your judgment. You got to lessen it at least a little bit. You got to work on it. Ken always said, don't work on it. And it took me a very long time to realize what this means. Don't work on it, right? The work is only an identification of the ego thought system. The rest is not our job. Love does not oppose the ego. So if we're at a party and we don't want to talk to anybody, or we want to get out of this place, and we're a course student, we could try to see everybody in the light of Christ. If it works, fine, right? If it truly works, it's wow, do it, take it, go home, the next day will come, and it's all good. But if it doesn't work, do not oppose the ego. right? Then he says, what merely is needs no defense. Only illusions need defense because of weakness. The ego needs the defense. We don't need the defense. We just look at the ego. We don't need to oppose it or change it in any way. What we would have to do in order to really change the ego. So let's say we're at a party, we're judging a bunch of people that are standing at the bar, right? In order for us to not judge them, because we're here in the world, we are judging them. That means we have attacked them. If we attack somebody, we must feel guilty, otherwise we wouldn't attack. If we feel guilty, we must believe we have sinned, otherwise we wouldn't feel guilty, we wouldn't attack, and we wouldn't perceive the guilt in those three people at the bar that look funny, right? Just to say, oh no, I can see the love of Christ in them, would skip this whole thing, and we wouldn't really need the course. So in order for us to be on our way home and not oppose the ego, we simply look at it. We simply look at, oh, I'm judging those people because I want to get rid of my guilt and I'm afraid of love. And that's it. There is a section, the shadows of limitation. I think that's just the name that Ken gave the tape set that he has. But escape, hold on. Anyway, I can't find it right now, but it basically says that it is not our task to be without limitations. It is our task over time to let them go, in a sense. Right? It's not our task right now to be without limitations, which means it's not our task to be without the ego, to be ego-free. That comes later, once we have gone through that process of looking at everything that blocks this awareness of love's presence, then we will be there. But for now, our task would be to look at the ego thought system with Jesus, and then he provides the non-opposing love. We don't have to generate that ourselves, right? Love in our state of mind, being here, as we said, in the sinful, guilty attack mode, defense, attack, fear, cycle, in this world, love is not our job. You know, if you want to be a what do you call it? A diver that does all those crazy pirouettes in the air, 3 backward flips and stuff from a 30-foot diving board, you would never start there. You would hurt yourself tremendously if you would start up there and your coach would say, okay, let's do it. You know, from the 30-foot diving board, backward flip. So you start with from 1 meter on foam with a bungee cords attached to a harness, right? That's how you start, and you very slowly over the years go higher and higher, and then eventually you do it without any kind of help. But that's not right now, right? It also says in this paragraph, you need no defense. Right? We need no defense, even though we're so defensive. We try to protect our ego. We try to protect that self we think is real, right? And we don't need a defense. The decision maker, the Son of God, doesn't need a defense, which means we don't need to protect the ego. And protecting the ego would mean trying to change it. So we just really look at the ego with Jesus. That is the defenseless way of becoming aware of the ego thought system, and then we can let it go over time. I'm not 100% sure if this came across or not, so I'm just gonna stop now. I think I said what I wanted to say. Maybe I feel myself a little bit hesitant to accept this. I feel a little hesitation, and I believe it is my own notion that I need to change something in the ego in order for me to move forward on this journey. Right? I need to somehow get better at something. We'll see. Thanks for watching.